Reverend Christie Hardwick. I love to lead people to greater and greater levels of prosperity and wellness. And I use those words separately, even though sometimes you can use them interchangeably. I mean, what is prosperity without wellness, right? And you are prospered when you are well, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. But let's break them down. Prosperity is something that is personal to each one of us. Sometimes we think of prosperity as simply how much we have, how much freedom we have. Freedom as prosperity. Do I have the freedom to do, to be, to have, to experience anything that my heart desires? Is that prosperity? Or is prosperity about having the things, about the home and the car and the bank account that we believe is necessary to experience that freedom? One of the most important things about defining prosperity for yourself is deciding what it really means. A lot of times I will talk to people, and when they describe prosperity in terms of the channels through which they receive their income, for example, having a good job, or having a well-paying job, or having a bank account, or having a retirement bank account, or being able to invest, or being able to have the things that they believe represent prosperity. When I ask further questions about what that's going to bring them, how does that apply to your sense of fulfillment? How does it bring you joy? The more we dig deeper on those questions, we find out that it's about that sense of freedom to experience life. And sometimes it's about being with other people and the love that you experience. So when we break it down, we find out that prosperity for people really is about being surrounded in love and being free to respond to each moment of life. Now, does that require that we have a certain amount in the bank account? We may think so, but it's worth rethinking about it. So first off, when it comes to prosperity, I say define what it means to you. Prosperity looks like this. And you've heard a lot about the idea of envisioning and visualization and bringing things into your experience. So when you write about prosperity looks like this, it gives that beautiful substance, the divine substance, something to work with, whatever it looks like to you. There is a wonderful story of a man who was fishing off of a dock and had a nice pile of fish, and a person came by who said, "You're really good at that. You ought to make a business out of it." And he said, "Well, I'm enjoying my fishing." And the man who was speaking had a yacht and houses and all kinds of things. He said, "Yeah, but I enjoyed what I did, and I just built a business out of it. And then eventually I was able to build an even bigger business. Then eventually I was able to buy this and that and the other. And then eventually I was able to be here on my yacht and just, fish whenever I want." And of course the person said to him, "But that's what I'm doing now. So I didn't need to build anything more. I didn't need to have it scale." Now, if the person who came by with the yacht, who was fishing off his yacht, had the vision that that's what brought him joy, then perfect. Then he went through all those stages and channels. But was it necessary? Are the steps necessary? Do we need to move through hurdles? Do we have to have this and then have that and then build this and then build that? If we think so, if that's part of our path that we designed for ourselves, and if it feels in the flow of life. But is it necessary? Not necessarily. Your definition of prosperity has to do with how you decide to approach it and how you would like that journey and pathway to feel for you. I know that for the first part of my life, I felt like my journey to prosperity was about things and about bank accounts and about jobs and all those things. And I also thought that it should be hard. I should struggle. I should work extremely hard. I shouldn't really have a lot of extra time on the margins because otherwise I wasn't doing it right. And the result of that was that I ended up with a lot of stress. People who knew me back in the day when I was in technology companies striving and thriving, but stressed, would say that I seemed older then. I'm in my 60s now. I was in my 30s then. And I can tell you that if you saw pictures of me, you would have thought it was the opposite. I was so unhealthy because I was working so hard at trying to achieve what I thought it was that I wanted, and that there was something at the end of this striving and thriving and working and stressing that was finally going to give me what I was looking for. And you know what I was ultimately looking for? Space. The ability to appreciate moments, spend time with my children, who I'm sure for a decade missed their mother, who was so busy building for a future that she thought required a big bank account. And I'm not against big bank accounts. So if prosperity is about that, actually my bank account is very healthy. If prosperity is about that for you, then envision that and see that and be inspired to take the steps that will allow that to flow into your life. But remember not to think of that as where your joy comes from or what makes you actually prosperous. It's our mental attitude. I made and remade and lost and gained over and over again fortunes because I was not mentally and spiritually prepared to receive that which I thought that I wanted. I didn't actually have the capacity to hold the level of prosperity that I thought I should have because I did not expand my capacity. I did not expand my container, my sense of belief, my sense of knowingness enough to receive what was flowing. The universe provided everything that I was calling for. I just managed to let it slip right away again because I actually was not prepared to accept it as mine. I thought I needed to strive. So I would stay in a perpetual trying to get. And the universe was responsive. You trying to get it? Okay, we'll stay in the trying to get it. So we have to let all that you've already accumulated go so that we can be in trying to get it. You see? So this idea of prosperity that you define for yourself also leads us to another question. This other question is, what is the source of my prosperity? We talked about some channels: jobs, income, bank accounts, investments, experiences. But what is the source? So once I realized my source was not the channels, was not that person, job, event, investment that income might come through, but that it was the source of infinite good that was available, I began to have a completely different experience of life. So knowing that the source was an unlimited source that provided for all at all times, the same source that knows how to let a seed grow in the soil and become the perfect thing that it was intended to become. That same intelligence was operating as me. So I didn't need to know all the steps about how something was going to flow into my life. I just needed to be clear that the source of it was unlimited and was always constantly providing. And I had evidence of that. So I started to watch for the evidence. So I started to study source and understand the unlimited and understand the creative process and understand spiritual law so that I could then lean into that rather than my own mental solutions about how I was going to go and get the thing that I thought I needed to have. Once I leaned into source I began to have a peace descend. And it didn't matter as much how much was flowing at any given moment. It didn't matter as much. What mattered was that I knew what was flowing was from an unlimited source that never failed. And no matter what it looked like in appearances at any given moment, there was constant flow in my direction. And sometimes I was surprised by the source. I was surprised by the opportunity that came up. I was surprised by the gift. I was surprised by finding a role that gave me, as part of the benefits, travel to amazing and beautiful places. I had said that travel to amazing and beautiful places was part of what I wanted to see in my experience. And I didn't define it as I needed to have the money in order to pay for and go and do. I just said I wanted these experiences. So the universe supplied it in a way that was very creative. A work that I got to do that I loved, and the perk that came with it was going to these beautiful places and being paid for it. This is what happens when we allow for prosperity to flow from source directly and not try to define the channels that it comes from and get attached to those channels and get concerned about how we're going to make it happen. I let go of the make it happen mentality when it comes to prosperity and have found myself with so much more grace and ease in my experience of prosperity in my life. So for me, prosperity is space and freedom and the ability to do those things that I'm called to do. Sometimes it requires money, and sometimes it requires faith, and sometimes it requires just being with what is. And I appreciate all those things today. Let's talk a little bit about wellness. As I said, I love to lead people to greater and greater levels of prosperity and wellness. Wellness also requires you to define for yourself what that means. We're all born with and sometimes are experiencing different levels of physical ability. And we are experiencing different challenges to our emotional wellness and even our spiritual wellness. So I don't think of wellness as a static thing, that at one point you arrive and you are now well, and then you remain well in that exact same way throughout your life. Wellness is dynamic. Wellness is that ability to feel your aliveness for me. So therefore, whatever I may be experiencing, whether it's physical or emotional or spiritual, if I may be challenged, my definition of wellness is about that sense of aliveness. So I accept all of that in the flow of my wellness. So that's my definition. Now, what's your definition of wellness? How do you define being well? And what does that feel like to you? What does it include? What do you need to allow in order that to be your experience? And sometimes what do you need to release in order for that to be your experience? I release things regularly. We all have histories that we come from, our families of origin, even our ancestry. And sometimes we are carrying those things with us, sometimes unconsciously. So I am constantly doing work to release anything that's in the way of experiencing wellness, whether it's physical, emotional, or spiritual. And my indicator is what I call my joy meter. Is my joy meter here or all the way off the charts here? Always willing to continue to grow in joy, believing that that vibration is beneficial to myself and to the whole of which I am part. So my definition of wellness, as I said, is dynamic. And you want to come up with what your definition of wellness is. And then find the tools that will allow you to uncover that sense of wellness in you. Because we go back to, just like we did on prosperity, source. What is the source of your wellness? It's a divine pattern operating as you. And as you recognize that divine pattern, you can then release anything in the way that is giving you any other kind of indication, and you go back and focus on that source of your wellness, the divine pattern. When we're experiencing something physical, we can focus on the divine pattern. We know about Joe Dispenza, who wrote Being Supernatural, I think, is the title of one of his books. But he talks about taking that to a real extreme and amazing limit by laying there and healing himself. He was able to do that. I personally haven't mastered the capacity. I know that it's possible. I've had some breakthroughs on that. But we know that the source of life is ever present, and that divine pattern is always operating. Therefore, if we can align ourselves with it and align our feeling place and our belief at a high enough vibration, we can find ourselves back into that wholeness. And there's nothing but good coming from our continual attention towards source and alignment, even if it doesn't immediately result in the physical. And it can. Because I find, no matter what challenges I'm dealing with in my body or in my emotions or my spiritual life, that as I continually return to source and continually remind myself that I'm made of the stuff of the moon and the stars, and that this unlimited source is love, and that there are spiritual laws that are operating, as I remind myself of that, I return to a sense of well-being. And this sense of well-being is the place from which I can be speaking to you, the place from which I can share my life and my joy and my resources, the place from which some wisdom can be found. You are a prosperous and well being at your essence, because you're made of life itself, which is ever giving and full and unlimited. And you are well at the core of your being, because there's a place inside, a light, a life force that is perfect, that never diminishes. We know this about ourselves. So as we align with that infinite aspect of ourselves, we realize prosperity and wellness in our lives. What is your definition of prosperity? What is the source of your prosperity? What is your definition of wellness? What is the source of your wellness? Know these things. Know for yourself, and move everything out of the way of living into that vision.